there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to day 2 of Magic Origin Spoilers. Today we're going to be looking at all the blue cards in the set. So yesterday we looked at all the white cards. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, you can check it out on the channel. And we'll be looking at a color a day until we get to the 6th day, which will be Wednesday, and we'll look at all the colorless and multicolor cards. So we'll have all the information out to you a few days before the pre-release, which will be Friday night at the earliest. So, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet to the channel, definitely a good time to do so you don't miss any of our installments of our set review. But having said that, let's jump into the cards. The first one is Alamarat High Arbiter, and this is a very good card for Commander. It lets you look at all your opponent's hands and maybe even stop a combo that's coming your way. Pretty decent card, and you get a big flyer out of it. In Limited, the effect's not going to mean as much. I mean, it's a nice effect. It's not nothing. It could help you. But it's probably more important that it's a 5/5 flyer. That's the part in Limited that you're going to be really excited about. So, yeah, it's Limited Bomb. You'll certainly play it, if nothing else, just to get some damage across. Pretty good card in that case. Not really going to make any of the competitive constructed formats due to pricing. Next is Anchor to the Ether, and it's a nice little bounce spell for creatures. I like these tempo plays. Now it's at sorcery speed. Maybe it'd be a little better if it was like an instant, but hey, you can't have everything because this does have Scry 1, and Scry 1 is very powerful. We've seen Scry effects just make regular cards that much better, and even if you do have to cast an extra mana to play it with Scry, it's usually worth it. Next is Artificer's Epiphany. This is an interesting one. So it's basically feels like a divination at instant speed, but you have to have an artifact to really strictly draw the 2 cards. Now, it's not necessarily hard to have an artifact in play, especially in this limited format. Maybe not so much in constructed, but if you don't have an artifact in play, you still cycle the card and you loot, and that's not horrible. There's not a lot of good options out there, maybe other than, say, Anticipate, that lets you feel like you're really kind of going through your deck and making some card selection. So this could see some play in the right standard deck if it's needed out there. I guess the question is, would you rather have a card like this, or would you just simply rather have a sorcery that costs 3 and you just draw 2 cards without the drawback? I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just a different type of card, but it's still very strong. You'll play it in Limited. Aspiring Aeronaut, and it costs 4 for a flyer. Now, it's a 1/2, so what are you getting out of it? Well, you're getting a 1/1 Thopter token. There's not a whole lot of value there. I mean, the Thopter token and this guy both have some evasion, so that's not horrible. But when you're casting 4, you just feel like you want a little more than 2/3 power and toughness on the board. However, there is a synergy around these Thopters, and just like we've seen in recent Magic sets like Modern Masters, it seems like synergy drafting is more important than the actual power of the card. If I look at this card, I'm going to say this isn't a very good card, but in a Thopter deck, this becomes a very good card. So you just want to watch out for those synergies. This card probably is not going to see any play outside of Limited, quite honestly. I don't really see anyone trying to build some great Commander Thopter deck, although, hey, someone probably will. But at the same time, you're not going to see this in Standard or anything like that. Next, Bone to Ash. Very simple card. Pay 4, you get to target a creature and counter it, and draw a card. I mean, counter spells that let you cycle are very powerful effects. This one costs 4. It's 2 blue on color, but in Limited, this is going to be great because obviously most of the spells that come out are going to be creature spells, and you get to refill your hand when you play this. So this is a good Limited card. It's not going to fit into all decks. I mean, you want to have a controlling theme and not like an aggressive theme, but as long as you have that at least partially control theme, this will be good. Calculated Dismissal. So this is interesting. It's basically mana drain, but for 1 more mana, and the extra ability if you have Spell Mastery, you get to scry 2. So is that good enough? I think it is. It's definitely going to be fine in Limited. It's going to be a really fine card for you in Limited, and I think it's good enough to see Standard play. Yeah, it's not going to be as good as Mana Leak, but don't underestimate the scry once again, especially in a control deck that may need to dig through its extra lands to get to its spells. It could be very good, and who knows, in Constructed, it may turn out to really be strong. Next, Clash of Wills. And I don't know, these counter spells never feel as good as they look. Basically, you do have to hold up a lot of mana because you don't really know what your opponent's going to do. Now, in the early game, it's a lot better, obviously, when your opponent's playing, say, a 2-drop or a 3-drop, and you can basically play this and they're completely tapped out. It becomes a lot better. But in the mid to late game, then all of a sudden you're in this situation where you have to hold a lot of mana. You don't really know what your opponent's going to play. If they play something big, it's still good, but if they play something small, it's worthless in your hand. So, it's a little situational. I mean, some limited decks will play it if they're really going for a deep control theme, but it's just not always going to be great for you. Claustrophobia. This is premium blue removal. If you've ever played with this card, say Innistrad for example, you'll know how good it is. Blue's quasi removal never really gets rid of the creature, but this is the closest thing. It taps it, it keeps it tapped, so it basically shuts down any tap effects and doesn't allow the creature to attack and block, or block in most cases. Very, very good card. You're going to want to draft these relatively high. Days Undoing. So here's an interesting one. This is a mythic, and this is your time twister that basically ends your turn when you play it and exiles itself. So is Time Twister broken if you don't get the effect first? It's still very, very powerful, and there's cards out there, especially if you look at, say, Modern or Legacy, where you can turn this into an instant. Like Quicken is probably the best example. I think it only costs 1 blue, so you're basically going to pay 4 mana to have Time Twister instead of 3 mana. That's not bad. It does cost 2 cards. You do have to set that up a little bit, but it's still a very, very powerful effect and will fit into, let's say, a Storm deck or something like that very easily. A very interesting card. So does it have any applications in the standard environment? It could. It's strong enough that it could. Someone's going to have to figure that out, but it could show up. I wouldn't be shocked if it did. As far as limited goes, it's kind of a panic card. I mean, if you need to restock your hand desperately and you're behind, you need to stabilize, this card will be fine. I'd probably run it. It's cheap. You're not going to play it if you're ahead, but it's one of those cards, kind of like a board sweep. You kind of hang on to it just in case, and it could make for some very interesting limited matchups. So, kind of a fun card. Very interested to see how this is going to do. Deep Sea Terror, and this guy's a 6/6 for 6. He's a house. He doesn't have evasion, and he can't attack unless there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard. Now, there are a lot of kind of self-mill cards in blue, and there's definitely a synergy between some blue and black with cards coming from your graveyard and cards that are in your graveyard being exiled. So this is one of those cards. So if you're building that deck and you have ways to mill yourself, this will be a good guy for you. A little annoying that he doesn't have evasion, but you'll use him in limited. Disciple of the Ring. And here's the next mythic. This doesn't feel super mythic to me, though. I mean, it's got a lot of fancy abilities and stuff, but costs 5 for a 3/4. Okay, that's something in limited, I guess, but doesn't really have evasion. Now, to activate its ability, you need to exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. So you have a finite amount of times you're going to be doing that. Again, it's better in the strategy where maybe you're milling yourself and stuff like that. The best thing I think this thing can do, though, is if you put it out, it might slow your opponent down from playing some non-creature spells, maybe for a little while, especially if you can threaten with a couple instant or sorceries in your graveyard. But pumping it 1/1 isn't super good since it doesn't have evasion. Tapping or untapping creatures can be good. I mean, that can definitely be good. But again, you only get a finite amount of times you can do that, and your opponent can see it coming because it's sitting on the board, so it won't be a surprise. I just don't really like this card very much. I don't see it getting any play. I even consider if I opened it in my sealed pool, would I play it? I'd probably play it as long as I had enough instant and sorceries to complement it. It's probably good enough to get by, but I could also see myself cutting it if I just had better cards. I don't know. It's definitely not going to push me into blue by any means if I'm in a draft or sealed. So, yeah, just not one of my favorites. Very disappointing mythic. Disperse. I love these effects. These bounce effects are great. It reminds me of Boomerang. Boomerang used to be able to bounce a land, though. They don't really do that anymore because it really kind of messes with the tempo pretty severely. But this is still a great tempo card. You'll play this in limited and be very happy with it. This placement wave. So first off, I'll say this is not upheaval. It's nowhere near as good as upheaval, but that's good because upheaval is incredibly broken and stupid. So this is a good card. Again, this is one of those kind of panic button cards. You're going to use it to sweep the board if you need to. Now the lands stay in play, so you're going to use this past the turn. Your opponent's still going to kind of have the advantage. But if you need to stabilize, that's what it's there for. I might run a one of this in a limited deck just as a panic button, just in case I fall behind. Now, if you're ahead, you're never going to play this card, and it becomes a dead card. So, know your deck. It's going to be better, obviously, in decks that have cheaper casting cost, or decks that maybe have some counter magic that can counter some of the things that you've returned to your opponent's hand. But yeah, I think it can be a decent card in limited. Dreadwaters, and here's one of those mill cards I was talking about. You can mill your opponent if you're trying to do that strategy, and there are some mill opponent cards in here, but I don't know if there's enough to really make that strategy good in limited. This is more, I think, for milling yourself to activate some of the cards, some that we've already seen, some that we're going to see, especially in the blue-black strategy. Next is Fairy Miscreant. This is one of those draft as many as you can cards that I kind of like. It's a flying man, which isn't super good in today's environment. It used to be a lot better, I think, years ago when creatures were weaker. But it's not bad. It still has evasion. You can still get in there for some damage. But if you can draft yourself 3 or 4 of these and then start drawing a few cards here and there, now that becomes really good. So definitely a good draft card. Probably not quite as good in sealed, but in a draft, if you can get your hands on these, it's pretty decent. Harbinger of the Tides. And here's another bounce spell tempo card. Now it does only work on tapped creatures. It's a little disappointing. I would have liked to have seen this be maybe any creature, but it does only cost 2 blue, and you also get a 2/2 creature out of it. So it's pretty good. It's a decent card. Now, it is asking for a pretty strong blue commitment, especially early game, but this isn't the type of card you're trying to necessarily put down on turn 2. This is the type of card you want to put out when you need to bounce a tapped creature. So, yeah, very strong card. You're going to play this in limited probably more than anywhere. And I shouldn't overlook the fact that you can play it at instant speed if you pay a couple more mana. That makes it a little stronger as well. Next is Hydrolash, and it's a combat trick for blue. What's nice, though, is it affects all attacking creatures, so it can really... This is one of the better blue combat tricks. Usually I don't like these blue cards that just take away power. You just feel like, well, maybe I can get a little advantage out of it, but not a ton. Now, this, since it affects all creatures, could potentially, when your opponent's coming in for lethal, could really mess up with the math and allow you to come back and backswing to win, which is kind of cool. And it also draws you a card in cantrips, so I could see myself running this in limited, which is very unusual because I usually don't run these type of cards, but I think this one is pushed a little more than normal. Jace's Sanctum, and here's an enchantment that kind of falls into the enchantment matters stuff that we've been seeing in this set, but this is a pretty powerful one. It costs 4, instant sorceries cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast one, you get to scry 1. That's kind of awesome. This is strong enough that it could potentially see some play in a control standard deck. So it'll be exciting to see if it does show up there. Now that deck has to have all the pieces and exist, but this is going to be a part of it if it does. As far as your limited game goes, it's not going to be off for all decks. You want to make sure you have instant sorcery spells and enough of them to cast to make this profitable, because you are taking a turn off probably to use this and put it out on the battlefield. But it's strong enough that it will probably catch you up quickly with the scry. So I would try this out in the right deck and limited. Alright, Jace of Ryan's Prodigy and Jace Telepath Unbound. So we'll talk about Jace a little bit. I'm not super thrilled with him. I don't think he's real powerful. I mean, he's still going to be good for you in limited. I don't know if there's much application beyond that. Here's what he does well, though. He loots, and I love that. So if you put him out in turn 2, you might be able to loot 4-6 times even, and that's pretty strong. I almost just rather have that than his Planeswalker abilities, to be quite honest with you. The fact that I can have a looter that he's 0-2, sure, but he only costs 2, and I only have to tap him. I don't have to pay any mana to loot or anything like that. His front side is very good. I really like that. Now, his Planeswalker side, this isn't that exciting to me. Now, I like the fact he comes in with 5 loyalty counters. Can he protect himself is the first question, and that first ability sort of, kind of, but I don't know, not really. Just one creature gets -2, -0 into your next turn. Well, that's okay, but I don't really think that's going to do a great job protecting him. Now, if it was something like all creatures attacking Jace get -2, -0 to end a turn, that might be a little better. So, it's just not a real strong ability. Now, his -3 ability is a strong ability, especially after you had a chance to loot, that you can basically give flashback to an instant or sorcery card. Only issue is you're playing that effect at sorcery speed, so you can't really pull out, say, a counterspell or something like that. You have a more, I guess, calculated effect that you have to use, so you can't really surprise your opponent with anything with that. Finally, his -9 is fine. I like the fact that it's just basically a mill ability that is going to be very strong and limited, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily win you the game instantly, which is good. I don't think it's fun when those ultimates just basically are your opponent's scoops. So your opponent still has a chance, but maybe a slim chance at that point in a limited game. So don't get me wrong, it's going to be a great card in limited. Play it all day long. But I don't really know if it's going to see any constructed play, quite honestly. If there's a deck out there, control deck, that really wants to get the looting in, then it could make it just for the front side. But yeah, it's almost a drawback that I feel like you have to flip him at some point. Next is Jessian Thief, and I like this card a lot. Basically, this is the Next is Jessian Thief, and I like this card a lot. Basically, this is a Shadow Mage Infiltrator, but you only have to pay a blue and 2 colorless, and it has Prowess instead of Fear. But other than that, same card. And Prowess is a very powerful effect, especially in the right deck. So again, I see this being definitely a big limited card. I would certainly play this in limited. I could see this possibly showing up in a control shell for standard. A little more of a stretch because it's not as evasive as you probably like for a deck like that, but the card draw ability is good, so could make it there, but for the most part, definitely a good limited card. Next is Maritime Guard, and this is just kind of a little creature. It's meant to really gum up the board so that you can kind of build out your land base for your control. So that's its role. That's its only role, and it's going to be subjugated to limited. So if you have that limited deck, this guy will be fine, but most cases probably not going to make the cut. Mizium Meddler, and I like this one a lot too. This costs 3 for a 1/4 with flash, but when he comes into play, you get to change the target of spell or ability to him. So he's kind of like a one-time mini Spellskite. But Spellskite is very, very powerful, as you know if you played Modern recently, and it can really disrupt things like Splinter Twin. So there may be definitely a place for him in Modern, even if it's Modern sideboards. I can definitely see a place for him in Standard, and he's a great limited card, real strong, I think, limited bomb. Negate, and Negate's a staple. It's been around for a long time now. I think it's stayed in Standard for a number of years, if I'm not mistaken, and it continues to. It does see some Standard play. It will always, as long as it's Standard legal, and it's a very fine card in Limited. Maybe not quite as good in Limited, which is a little more creature-centric, but it's still good to have. It still comes in useful. Next is Nivix Barrier. This is a fine little combat trick for limited. It could give you a profitable block and instant speed and surprise your opponent. Not always going to make your cut if you got better cards, but it's not horrible. Definitely can gum up the game if you're playing a control strategy in limited. Next is Psychic Rebuttal, and this probably comes out of your sideboard in limited. You want to make sure your opponent's going to be chucking some instant or sorceries at you before you play this. But if they are, it's a good card. It's a cheap counterspell, and if you have Spell Mastery, you get to fork and redirect it. Pretty nice effect. I don't know if I see it. I definitely don't see it in Standard. Could it be a sideboard card in other formats? Formats that have powerful sorceries and instants like a Legacy or even a Modern? Perhaps, but I don't know if it's good enough. Just because a lot of times in, say, Legacy, when you have something like this happening, it's a storm effect, which this really wouldn't save you from. So I don't know if it's going to get there, but it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it could end up being a sideboard card in the constructed format at some point. Commander, I would definitely play this in Commander. If somebody's trying to like fireball you out or something like that, it might be a nice little card to have. Ring Warden Owl. I like this guy. He's 5 for a 3/3, and he's got flying and prowess. That's pretty cool. Awesome limited card. He's at the common slot, so you'll see a lot of him floating around, but he's kind of a limited bomb. I really like him. Scrapskin Drake, another real strong limited card. This guy's basically Cloud Elemental, but he's a zombie, so if that matters, hey, that makes it even better. But yeah, 2/3 flyer. Only drawback is it can't block anything on the ground. Yeah, that's quite all right. Great card. Screeching Scab. And here's another card that's going to help you populate your graveyard a little bit for those strategies. It's a 2/1 for 2, and it gives you a little bit of ability to mill yourself. So in those decks, it's going to be a great card. Outside of those decks, yeah, you're probably going to skip it. Send to Sleep. These cards I really like. These type of effects. Only cost 2. You get to tap 2 creatures at instant speed. It can really play a nice tempo game. It can help you get in for some lethal damage next turn. And then if you have Spell Mastery, they don't untap on the next untap phase, so they basically stay frozen for an extra turn. That's strong enough that alone can win you the game. If you ever played with Sleep, you know how powerful this effect can be. This is fantastic. So yeah, you're going to play this all day long in limited and be very happy that you have it. Next is Separatist Void Mage. Speaking of cards you'll play all day long in limited, here's another one. These creatures that come into play with bounce effects are always amazing, and no matter what you have to pay for them, we've paid 2 for them in the past, we paid 5 for them. Yeah, I'll pay 4 for them. This guy is a 2/2. That's fine with me. The effect is what I'm more concerned about. It's going to really help your temple game and help you get ahead and get in there for the win. Sigled Starfish. I love this card as well. We've just had a streak of really good limited cards. This is a card that I used to play all the time in limited, and it seems unassuming, but it gums up the ground, it protects you, it lets you play your long, more controlling game, and don't underestimate the fact that you can scry every turn with this card. That's off the hook, and that's why, even though it seems unassuming, notice that it is at the uncommon level. It's not a common, because that is that powerful. That Scry 1 is amazing. Next is Scab Goliath, and they reprinted the biggest, kind of most clunky one of these, I guess, from Innistrad block, but it's still good. If you're playing that strategy, especially where you're milling yourself a little bit and getting some cards in your graveyard, he's even better, and he's just kind of a 6-drop bomb in limited. He's at the uncommon slot too, notice, so he's a little bit easier to pick up and find. 6/9 Trampler, he's going to be great for you. Again, he's going to be better in those mill decks, so keep that in mind, but he's still a limited bomb. He's a good guy. Speaking of limited bombs, here's another huge one. Soulblade Djinn, I'll pay 5 for a 4/3 flyer. That's awesome and limited. And then on top of that, he has prowess, and he gives all your other creatures prowess. That's pretty amazing. So yeah, awesome and limited. Is there a place for him in standard? Mono Blue Devotion isn't dead yet. It still has a little time before it leaves standard. He could possibly fit into that deck somehow and be very good for that deck. So really interesting. It'll be interesting to see if that happens. But really fine card. Could also be a good commander card, I think, in the right deck. Sphinx's Tutelage, and this one's interesting to me. I want to see if someone can break this card. So there's my challenge to the community out there. If somebody break this card. The reason I say that is it reminds me a lot of Grindstone, which is very, very powerful in Legacy, along with the combo of Painter's Servant, which Painter's Servant is a modern legal card. So the difference, though, is it says non-land cards that share a color, and that is a big difference. Grindstone doesn't say non-land cards, so basically what happens is I play a Painter's Servant, I choose a color, now my opponent's entire deck is that color, so when I Grindstone, it grinds their entire deck out and mills their entire deck. So that's the combo that you see in Legacy. This would be slightly harder to pull off because whenever you ran into a land, the combo would stop. So you'd have to remill, basically. And the way you remill here is by drawing a card. So there's a lot of card draw effects. I mean, there's a little cheap cantrips on things. There's different ways to draw cards. There's a way right on this card to draw a card, even though it's kind of pricey. So it'd be interesting to see if this is a viable Painter's Servant sort of combo in Modern. Now, outside of Modern, I don't know if it will really have a place. Maybe in Limited, if you are playing a little bit of Enchantment Matters, it will be okay for you. Looting's awesome, but 6 is very expensive. And is there really a true mill strategy where you're just milling without trying to break it? Probably not. I don't really think it's that strong, even though there are some cards out there that do it. Next is Stratus Walk, and this is an aura that's decent, especially if you're playing with that Artifact Matters theme. And the reason it is decent is because simply it's cantripping. When it enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. So you're not getting 2-for-1 necessarily when this creature gets destroyed. Gives the creature evasion. It kind of gives it that Cloud Elemental drawback, but that's fine. That's fine. This is a more aggressive card to help you get a big creature across with evasion. Good limited card for sure. Talent of the Telepath. And I kind of like this card. It's definitely going to be an awesome commander card. I don't know if it's going to be always great in Limited because your opponent may or may not be playing a lot of instant or sorceries. Maybe it's more of a sideboard card in Limited. Same thing, I don't really see it being played in Standard unless maybe as a sideboard card, but I don't know. Really, if you could play this on yourself, this card would be crazy nuts broken, but you can't, so that's probably a good thing. But yeah, it's definitely a strong ability as long as your opponent is playing instant and sorceries. It can be a very strong ability, especially with spell mastery. Thopter Spy Network. So on paper, you first look at this and you probably think, well, this is an enchantment for that Thopter deck. Might get a little enchantment matter synergy out of it. But here's the thing I see, and I don't know, maybe I'm overvaluing this. It costs 4, which is twice as much as a Bitter Blossom. I get it. But this card feels a lot like Bitter Blossom to me. Now, 4 is a much more fair price than 2, especially 2 on color. It's probably good that it costs that much. I realize that you have to have an artifact to kind of start the chain going, and if you lose your artifacts, it kind of shuts off. But if you have an artifact and you get this in play, you basically have a Bitter Blossom, which is kind of amazing. And on top of that, you don't have to take a point of damage every turn. And if your artifact creatures get across, you get to draw cards. That's kind of amazing. So I don't know. This card could potentially be strong enough to see some standard play. It'll be interesting to see if it makes it. Definitely, this is a bomb. This is a serious bomb in Limited. I would play this all day long. So I don't know. Maybe I'm overestimating its power because it does cost 4 instead of 2, and it does have a drawback to kind of get it going. But wow, I just feel like this potentially could take over the game. Towergeist, and this is a fun little reprint. I always like this card. Cost 4, you get a 2/2 flyer, so you get that evasion out there, and you get a little bit of card selection. You get to dig a little bit into your library, and it also puts the card in your graveyard, so if that matters to you, it's going to help with that strategy as well. Very good card. Turn 2 Frog. I always like this. It's an instant. Blue has to kind of jump through hoops a little bit to destroy a creature, but this is probably the closest you're going to get to something like a destroy creature effect. You kind of have to use it in combat or alongside direct damage or something like that, but it's very powerful, and the fact that it's very cheap and at instant speed makes it very, very good and Limited. Water Courser is kind of a little version of Water Elemental. This will do good work in Limited. It costs 3, so it's pretty cheap. It comes in as a 2/3, but don't underestimate the versatility of being able to mess with its stats. It can get in for some early, pretty heavy damage sometimes, these type of cards, or it can be a good blocker for you too. Boiler Rogue. Kind of feel the same way about this as the Artificer we looked at earlier. This one, it's a 2/2 for 4. That's painful. But you do get 2 1/1 flyers. So, okay, makes it a little better. And on top of that, you can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, and target creature can't be blocked this turn. Okay, that's a pretty nice effect. So, again, this is probably better in the Thopter Synergy deck. It might fit into some other decks, but for the most part, you're not going to always run this because of its casting cost if you don't have the synergies that go along with it. And finally, our last card is Willbreaker, and this one's a lot of fun. Cost 5 for 2/3. Whenever you get to target a creature an opponent controls with a spell or ability, you gain control of that creature. That's pretty awesome. Now, if you lose Willbreaker, you do lose the creature, so you know this thing's going to be a lightning rod. They're going to try to get rid of this as soon as possible. So if you have some sort of either like sack outlets, or if you have something that can basically sacrifice to make tokens or something like that, that's a lot better, because then you're in a situation where, okay, the creatures no longer belong to my opponent. I can make my own creatures, so when this dies, you don't have to worry about the backlash. But yeah, this is a really cool commander card. This will be really fun in Commander. This is a fine card in Limited. You'll certainly play this in Limited. It might give you a little bit of tempo, a little bit of advantage. Really fun card. Don't really see it making it like in a Standard or anything like that, but just a fun Commander card. I'd really like to try to play with this one in that format. So having said that, we got through all the blue cards for Magic Origins. So tomorrow we'll be back with the black set review, but hey, please remember to like and subscribe. As always, we really appreciate all the new subscribers and everyone watching, so thank you and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. If you're still looking for quality Magic the Gathering videos, click on one of these annotations. And if you hadn't had a chance yet to subscribe, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the breaking MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, crazy product openings, or gameplay videos on Heroes and Legends MTG. Talk to you again soon and have a great day.